and go.
Hi.
Hi.
Howdy.
Hi. I'm Amy.
I'm Lori.
I'm Haley.
And we are recording Hugo Girl, which is a podcast.
Novella-vember number 4.
The last of the Novella-vembers.
This is Novella-vember number 4, last of the November novellas. It's been a great month. I think we've had a good month reading novellas.
This has been a lot of work.
It's been a lot of work, but I'm glad we read some shorties.
Me too.
You know what I mean?
And some Hugo winners, because I realized we only read like 4 Hugo winners this whole year.
We were more adjacent this year.
We doubled our Hugo winners in the month of November.
This time we are reading The Emperor's Soul by Brandon Sanderson, which was recommended to us by Lori's work friend Nate.
Yeah. Hi, Nate.
Hi, Nate.
Thanks, buddy.
It's a 2013 Hugo Award winner for Best Novella. It is an entry in the Sanderson Cosmere. Dun, dun, dun. If you're interested in Sanderson, you'll know what that means. It takes place on Cell, the same world as Elantris.
That's like my car.
Oh.
And many people on the internet were upset because Amazon touted this as the second book in the Elantris series, but it is definitely not. And so people read it and they were like, what? And they gave it a bunch of bad reviews. So I feel bad for Sanderson for that reason.
Very unfair.
The story follows Shay.
I think I said shy, but either one.
Shy. S-H-A-I. Shy. Who is a capital F forger. Forgery is a practice of magic wherein you can rewrite the history of an object or person to make it appear to be something else or something new. Shy has been arrested for creating a forgery of a priceless painting, and she is sentenced to death. She receives a reprieve in exchange for helping the ruling faction of the Empire stay in control by forging a new soul for the Emperor. The Emperor was left brain dead after a recent assassination attempt. The bulk of the action involves watching Shy work in her cell, mostly as told to one of her captors, Arbiter Gautona. Shy rebuilds the Emperor's soul over 100 days. We watch her waffle between escaping and preserving her own life and finishing a project that would be her masterpiece. Shy's genius for her craft allows her to put together a soul that for the Emperor that could reignite the Emperor's youthful idealism that he lost living a life of luxury. Shy then escapes by using a pre-forged soul for herself that makes her into an action star.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Good job.
Okay.
Good job.
Goodies from Goodreads. Who's
I
got
have
one?
I have one. This one I think is unfair. This book, this is from Rachel from Goodreads. This book was only 167 pages long, and it took me all of 167 days to finish it.
So she read, it's like Dracula Daily.
Yeah.
She read in real time with Shy.
Yeah. I was like, come on, it's not that hard to read.
It was not. I read it in one night.
I pretty much did too. Kevin took my phone, helpfully, took
Aw.
my phone and put it in another room. And I just sat down and read the whole thing pretty much.
I went to bed one night and went to read it just to fall asleep and ended up reading the whole thing accidentally.
Yeah, it's got a good story.
It's a good, easy read.
Yeah.
I've got one. I have, from Reading Into the Void, a 1-star review. I very rarely read books by men these days. And this is why.
Aw.
It is honestly just lazy, lacking imagination, and utterly ill-informed to liken anything that is not at all like rape to rape. What makes so many men feel compelled to do that? Expand your vocabulary, folks! Now, I don't necessarily agree with that, and I'll talk about that during general discussion. I frequently agree with that premise, but not in this instance.
I don't remember there being even a mention of rape.
I got you.
There's
Okay, girl.
there's one mention I highlighted.
We'll talk about it later.
Yeah.
I had a couple, but I'll read this one. Mesorim Anamarum wrote, that was his name, Brandon Sanderson has to be one of the most overrated fantasy authors for adults, for adults. He is the NSYNC of fantasy. Catchy, popular, but producing formulaic, basic, monotone, a quote-unquote art.
Okay. Goodness.
The other quote I had was very similar. It's like, Sanderson is one of those safe writers. He always entertains. You won't be bored or disappointed. You know you can open something of his, forget your troubles, get away from the real world for a while. There won't be too much stress. You won't be challenged or scared or excited, more than is comfortable. You'll want to keep reading, but not too much.
That sounds great, actually. Right?
I know. Okay. I want to do my other one then.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
really
go for
short.
it. Yeah.
Lisa Marie, 1 star. I've only ever stopped reading 2 other books in my life because I was bored. Now it will be 3.
God, man, she's not read a lot of books.
So people weren't excited about this story, it seems like.
I thought it was good fun.
I thought it was good fun
Yeah,
too. And I was
really
actually
good.
thinking about how different it was from the other 3 we read for Novella-vember. Because I feel like those were all trying to say something big, like capital immorality.
Totally.
Yeah. And this one was just like, well, I mean, I
That's
do
not
think
art.
he brushed up against like the philosophy of like what is art.
Yeah.
But other than that, we weren't being browbeaten by
Yeah.
What if you
moral-
could have a bunch of versions of yourself in a box?
You know, I'd be okay.
I love that.
Hey.
Yeah.
What if I could pull out my work version and my writer version and my friend
You know,
version?
I generally don't like discussions of magic, but this one was fine.
So that's the first thing I want to talk about. Because Brandon Sanderson loves his magic systems, loves them. And he has these rules that he writes by about when you put magic in a story and how much information you have to give the
I think
reader.
I've heard about this, yeah.
About how much information you have to give the reader before you can do anything with your magic system. So he always spends a bunch of time giving you the entire magic system so that it seems plausible to you, like whatever is happening.
Yeah, like I couldn't tell you what she was doing when she was doing her work, but I was like, she's doing the thing, and it made sense.
So I was gonna see if y'all thought it worked. Like, did y'all? I don't think I always knew what she was doing.
Oh, I couldn't picture it. She was at a table with lots of messy papers, and like maybe she was like tracing on wood, but like I have no idea.
I guess she's locking in her magic in these little stones.
And stamps, like some of the stone stuff kind of reminded me of Broken Earth, like working with like stone, but
Did y'all read the? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I thought she was like carving these stamps into the stones, and then there are certain types of stones that are better suited for it because you can easily carve them but not break them, which is a confusing quality. And then I think she had to make a bunch of them because a personality has so much going on. So she had to make a gajillion of them and then condense them into one stamp that would, I guess, fit on
It's like
his
making a codex of like a lot of things or something like
I
that.
didn't think too hard about it.
collage.
Yeah. I just was like, she's doing her magic.
And then they keep the plates, I guess, so that they can reproduce it if they needed to.
Yeah.
They're like little metal plates, I guess.
Yeah.
Like casting
Yeah.
a mold.
So
like you
all
make
the-
the mold and then you cast the stamp.
all the tiny little parts were on these plates, and then the stamp like collated all that onto his skin or something like that. And
Something like that.
It was like
And
a
then,
Rube
like-
Goldberg machine.
so then the other part of it was what she is doing is saying, plausibly speaking, X object or X person could have had all these things happen to it, and therefore I can convince it that it is this new thing. Like that's what forging is.
Oh, that's with the stained glass.
Oh,
Is that what she's doing with people too, though?
I don't know. I think it's a little bit different, and that's why it's harder because like
You
there's
have to
so many
recreate
more.
a real thing?
Well, it's harder, but I think it's the same principle. Like she couldn't make him completely into somebody else. She couldn't make him into her mom
Right.
because there's not a scenario where he would have been her mom.
Right.
But she can make him into a version of himself that could have been if he hadn't been corrupted by luxury and power. So he's not that different. She's like, I think, emphasizing certain qualities of his character that were already there, but maybe had been somewhat stunted by choices and experience.
It's like if you had a teacher that made you look at your artistic side versus having a teacher at some point in your life that was like, no, you're more of a analytical thinker.
Yeah, I think it is like that.
And then you follow one path either.
Well,
Yeah.
but then like she can also like give herself muscles and change physical things too, like when she escapes.
It did seem like she was able to make herself very different from
I
what
guess,
she was.
but I guess this is kind of like everything everywhere all at once. Like there are these branching points of our lives where, you know, if you had made this one choice, you might have ended up a action star. If you'd made a different choice, you would have ended up a beggar. If you'd make a different
Yeah, but like
choice,
there's corporeal things that happen though, so like she can change them into an old lady or a lady who's a farmer.
I wonder if there were
Yeah.
if the reason she picked the different variations of herself that she picked were based on some experience that she had.
Mhm.
Like maybe she remembers a time in her life where she took a turn and looking back, she's like, man, glad I made that decision. Or I might have ended up like having to live on the street. Or she had an opportunity to join some soldiering something. And I mean, maybe those were all rooted in choices that she had made. So they were plausible things.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's interesting that this soul forging thing that he comes up with in this story, I don't think it shows up in any of his other stuff. And so like he created this whole thing just for this story and then you never ever see it. Like he doesn't elaborate on this ever, which is kind of sad because I think there's a lot here that he could definitely build on.
Yeah.
But he wrote one thing. So did you guys read, I think this was a foreword to the story that I had in the Cosmere Unbounded, which is, hold on.
Amy has a gigantic
I had a
tome.
gigantic tome called Arcanum Unbounded, the Cosmere Collection, in which this story appears.
That looks like a library book.
It is a library book.
Oh.
And then right before the story, he wrote this little essay, or right after it, he wrote this little essay about this story. And he said he was inspired to write this story after visiting the National Palace Museum in Taiwan.
Oh,
And
I saw that online. Yeah.
Also by memories of 2 years he spent in Korea as a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
I saw that.
Reminds me of our good friend Paolo Bassa.
He's like, well, I was thinking of like the archetype of like the guy who spent a semester abroad and becomes very bossy. But I will say, I didn't necessarily get that from him, though. Like when I was reading the actual story, I didn't feel like he was exoticizing. I didn't feel like he was being like, I know so much about such and such a culture. So it was like a thing that I sort of chuckled at, but he seems like a less toxic version. I mean, maybe a non-toxic version of that.
He may be non-toxic. I I don't know. He's a Mormon. You never can tell.
Well,
that's right. He's a Mormon.
Missionarying is always problematic.
That's what they do.
Yeah.
But that's what Mormons do. They have these
They
trips.
can't help it.
Well, men have to go on these trips to like other countries or other locations and proselytize.
They have to. I didn't know that.
And so his was apparently in Korea. And so he lived there for a couple of years, and then but the soul stamps or the forger stamps were based on these artist stamps that you see in China that are on like the big scroll paintings that you see.
It's a cool idea.
Well, I thought it was inspired by that, which seemed like fine, and that he acknowledged that it was inspired by that instead of being like, I made this up entirely out of my Western man's mind. But the thing that I thought was neat was he said he was inspired by it because an artist would make a thing, and then a king who saw the thing, who liked it, would add a stamp to it. So he was saying that it changes the character of the thing when all these people come after it and are like, I like this, so I'm going to put my stamp on it. And that was, I think, a neat thing to observe. A neat tradition, a neat thing to observe, and I liked the inspiration for the magic. And I mean, I don't know, it's easy for me to say here's a white lady in America, but I thought it was just like a neat inspiration.
I mean, I definitely didn't get the same ooky feeling off of this that I got off Wind Up Girl.
Right.
And it doesn't seem like anybody else on the internet really did either, at least from my half-assed research.
Because he doesn't, and I think it helps that he doesn't sexualize Shy in any way.
That's true.
He doesn't talk, like her culture, quote unquote, doesn't
well the people I
come
think,
up really.
Apart from her name, which sounds like it's an Asian derivative, they're described as either tall or have dark hair or curly hair. Like that could be anybody.
And she does say at one point that like all these people think that all Asian people look the same. Basically, she makes that comment.
Yeah.
Which I thought was kind of interesting. But yeah, I read that and I was like, is this that same white guy goes for a semester abroad and comes back and thinks he knows everything?
Yeah, and if I hadn't have read that, I wouldn't have thought it about his past. So.
I mean, I wouldn't have known that part. I was already feeling a little weird because at this point in my life, anytime I see a white guy writing about
anywhere
an Asian culture, especially, or an Asian derived culture. I mean, based on her name, that's what you come away with.
His fantasy version of an Asian culture.
I was like, I always like get a little bit like,
oh no,
like, what's this gonna be?
Apprehensive.
But I think it was fine.
Yeah, I felt like it was fine too.
It seemed pretty innocuous.
And she, we're looking at this story through her eyes. So she's othered in some ways by these characters, but ultimately we are with her looking at them.
Yes.
And I think that is important.
I agree. And
I think it is important that he acknowledges where he got this idea from, because a lot of writers don't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Batia Galupi did too.
Well, but he created a character.
It was different.
With no agency, though. Like, she's like the star of the story.
Which I think makes a big difference.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, so one of the other things that happens in this book is this big dialogue between Shy and her quasi-grandpa, Gautona.
/ captor.
Yeah.
The friendly captor trope.
And he doesn't see her as an artist because she's a forger, and she's like, no, I create art.
Well, not at first.
And then after he reads her little manifesto about the soul she put together, he's like, no, she is an artist. And then he was mad at her because she burnt a painting, but then he burns her manifesto. It's all big circle. Yeah. It's a big circle.
I didn't think about the burning and the burning.
The burning and the burning, right?
Good job.
Oh, thanks.
You and Brando. Good job, guys.
I did it. Okay. I was reading an AV Club review of this book, this story. which I can link. But they posed a couple of interesting questions. One of which was, what's the value of a work of art if almost anything can be copied through forging?
So there is a great essay called The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction by Marshall
yes.
McLuhan. And basically, it becomes less. Like, think about how many times you saw the Mona Lisa before seeing the Mona Lisa in person. If you have, I was completely underwhelmed because I've seen it up close in my face, in my hand, in classes. So when I finally saw it, it's like the size of a piece of paper from 20 feet away under glass. And I was like, boring.
I think the Mona Lisa suffers in particular because it's small and you can't get close to it because there's so many people. But I'll tell you, what I was impressed by was Picasso's Guernica. So like I'd seen that thing a bajillion times. I had postcards. I loved that painting and I'd had postcards of it in my home. Picasso being problematic now, it's a little whatever. But I was 18 and I loved him. But when I went and saw it, I was just like, overwhelmed by how amazing it was because it's huge and you can get right up to it. So I really think it depends.
Yeah, I like art, and when I go to museums, I like to go, but I've never been blown away by a piece of art because I think maybe because I have become desensitized to it, or maybe like art is just not my love language. I don't know.
Yeah, you like music.
Yeah,
Very topical right now too with the rise of
AI,
the AI
yep.
art things.
That's immediately what I thought of when I read that question. It was like, because now you can get on these AI things and put in a prompt which includes an artist or a piece of art, and it just I don't think it can really recreate them yet, but
no. Well,
because she definitely recreated it like stroke for stroke, like it was an actual painting as opposed to like a digital reproduction, which is what we have largely. But I do think it could dilute it.
Yeah, and I think if you're constantly surrounded by it too. I mean, I think it was special when you could only see the Mona Lisa one place, or maybe your grandpa had a postcard, but now like any kid anywhere, which I think is, I'm all for the democratization of information in any form, including art and music. But actually, I saw a TikTok this morning that was like, 200 years ago, if you had music playing during breakfast, you would have been rich. And now we do it every single day. Like, you don't even think about it. Like,
this goes back to the last of the Winnebagos and the loss of things that are special because time marches on.
Oh, yeah. Wow, I'm glad you remember that from a whole week ago.
yeah, that was
And not
Not 5 minutes
17 minutes ago.
But I also think that I love paintings. I like art, and
I do too. I don't get like, I've never been.
No,
like,
I know, and everybody responds to different things.
Yeah.
I do respond to being near a painting and seeing the brushstrokes and seeing the skill. It does affect me differently than looking at a digital reproduction of it. But if someone could perfectly reproduce these things, how would you ever know that you were looking at the original and what doesn't matter? Or is every one of them a masterpiece? I don't know.
Well, that's just it. I mean, like, I have a print of a David Hockney above my desk in my office, and
It's great.
I ordered it from China. I don't know if he did it. I'm sure a big printer did it, but like, it brings me joy every day when I look at it.
I mean, I have a print of a painting that I love too. I mean, I think that there is value in those.
Well, and some
reproductions.
people want the actual, like an actual Picasso or a first edition of a book
Yeah.
or a first pressing of a record. To me, that's
because
less
those
important.
are irreproducible, right?
Technically.
I mean, you cannot reproduce a painting right now. You can digitally reproduce
Yeah.
it,
Oh,
but
yeah.
the thing itself cannot be reproduced. But in this situation, the thing itself can be reproduced, which is interesting.
It would have to.
I mean, we have forgeries now too, but
Yeah. It would have to lessen its worth a little bit. I don't know.
right? It seems like it, but
Because if two people can buy it, it's not one of a kind.
Well, and something I think about with artists, like Haley had this project with a coworker they called Bitch Can't Draw. And they would be given a writing prompt and they would each draw what they could draw from the writing prompt. And her coworker, Matt's an artist. Is he graphic designer?
Yeah,
maybe you've seen our logo.
Yes, he designed our logo.
Yeah, and we can link. So, Bitch Can't Draw was something that we did because he's a great graphic designer. I'm a good copywriter. And we would be concepting together, and I'd be like, you draw a baby. Then he would draw a perfect baby, and then I would try, and it would look like a monster.
So the thing that always struck me about that is that an artist knows what things look like. And
I do
I
not.
don't know. And we talked about this where if you're like, picture a horse, like, I can picture a horse. It's the one thing I can draw. But like, I think a lot of times when you're prompted to draw something, for people who are not artistically inclined or visually inclined, it's hard to like really know what something looks like. So to me, the original does have something special about it because presumably that person, I mean, maybe they were looking at something, but they had to bring it to life on the canvas.
It's the original creation.
Yeah, and someone copying it is copying what's already been created. And I think that makes I don't think that her work is not art. But I do think there's something special about an original because the artist had to create it. And if you are copying it, you have something of a guide. I mean, you still are having to create, like, depth and lighting and things like that. But you can look at the paint and be like, oh, I think there's a little bit of lighter paint
What
here.
do you think of translations?
I don't know. Well, I think translations are interesting because translation does not work word for word. So you have to, you absolutely have to change the original because for me, so like sometimes I have to translate things at work. I don't do live interpretation. My Spanish is not good enough, but my writing and reading are good enough. And so sometimes I have to translate things at work. And so the thing I'm always thinking about is how do I make sure this person can understand what this means, not just what this says. And so I will sometimes work together with one of my colleagues who is fluent in Spanish or my colleague who is fluent in Spanish. If she's working on an English translation, Spanish is her first language, she might come to me because I have enough Spanish to help her and we can figure out like what is the sense of this that we want to communicate. So I think that there are a lot of changes that are inherent in translation. And so it's sort of a different, I mean, it is not sort of, it is a different medium.
So is the translation itself art?
I mean, not my letters at work, no. But like, so Three Body Problem is a great example. Yeah, absolutely. And there is a push for translators to be recognized in the Hugo Awards because the work that they're doing is not just like, oh, this word in English means this word in Chinese. I mean, that's not what translation, that's not what a good translation is. That's what Google Translate can do for you. Yeah. And it's getting better, but a lot of what comes out of Google Translate is goofy and doesn't mean anything to a reader.
Have you ever heard of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis?
No, what's that?
So it's the idea that your native language influences the way you think or vice versa. So like, there's certain things in certain languages that can't be translated to like, like there's certain things in Western culture versus, Eastern culture that you could try your best, but it's never going to be quite right. Because the way that you, like, some languages don't have articles. And so you have to put them in there. But, like, it's a fundamentally different way of saying, I have horses instead of I have the horses.
Okay. Anybody got anything they want to talk about?
Yeah. She has a Sherlock vibe that felt a little bit goofy to me, where the guy, is he called a blood sealer? Is that the guy? Yeah. So he comes to her room each day to basically make sure that she remains imprisoned in this room and can't run away by cutting her and then like stamping the door with her blood, which is so gross. And he's always fannying around with a handful of papers. And then finally one day she notices some wax and she's like, oh my God, they're letters from a sweetheart. And she just like deduces all these funny things that are very Sherlocky. Like it's so much information that she gets from one little thing. And I found that implausible. And it was also funny to me. I mean, there's certainly something to be said. Yeah, there's certainly something to be said for being observant. But at one point, her grandpa captor friend asks her like, well, how do you know everybody's business? And she's like, she gives this very long sort of poetical answer that is a non-answer because she is captive in this little tower. So like, how would she know who the maid's boyfriend is? Like from what we see, people aren't talking to her. I didn't quite buy her Sherlockiness.
Yeah.
I noticed it. I chuckled at it. I'm not mad about it, but I thought it was like a little bit goofy.
I had the same thought. The only thing I can think of that makes it plausible is that maybe the guards were talking to her more than it was shown to us. Well, and that she saw maybe some names or something on the papers, but that's about it.
Yeah, and she said several times that like she became fond of several guards, the one that she wasn't going to hurt as badly. So yeah,
so that's the only thing I can think of.
I didn't notice Sherlockiness, although it does vibe with. So I read half of Miss Bourne, and it's like a fantasy version of Ocean's 11, so it's like a heist. So I think this is his like bread and butter.
Yeah, he likes a magical criminal, a sympathetic magical criminal.
Miss Bourne's fun because it was
sympathetic magical criminal. It just kept coming out.
Miss Bourne is funny to me. It's like this weird mishmash between. So he wanted to write a Harry Potter where the bad guy won, and then he also wanted to write Ocean's 11.
Yeah.
So he put the two together in a book. I like Miss Bourne. I think it's ridiculous and fun.
Yeah, no, I mean, I really have no complaints with it.
He wrote this between the two Wheel of Time books that he wrote. So he finished up Wheel of Time when Robert Jordan died, and in between the two, he wrote this as a palate cleanser, which I think it checks out.
I liked the blood sealer magic because it reminded me of the Ninth House.
Yes, Gideon.
Oh, yeah, and the skeletons.
Animates all the skeletons and turns them into minions just like Harrow.
The skeletons in this were a lot less endearing than the skeletons in Gideon.
Skeletals, yeah.
Skeletals.
Yeah. It was funny. I was like, oh, this is the fight scene. It's cute. There we go.
I still thought it was fun. She had the sword fight with all these animated skeletons. And if he has like a little bit of her blood, he can like turn any bone into a little skeleton minion. I thought it was fun.
Until the blood goes stale, which I thought was cool too.
I know. I wanted a lot more information about that guy and his whole culture.
Yeah.
Yeah, this would be a good novel.
Yeah.
This is another one where I would like to read the expanded version.
Agreed.
That's so different from a lot of the books that we read, where it's like, this should be a novella.
Yeah.
So I wanted to come back to what you were saying before about the rape reference.
Oh, okay. So let's see. I'll read the passage. Shai had access to plenty of soul stone and she would use it. However, often more elementary methods were of greater use. People always expected a forger to use seals for everything. Grands told stories of dark witchcraft, of forgers placing seals on a person's feet while they slept, changing their personalities, invading them, raping their minds. I was okay with that analogy. I agree in a general sense that I think people overuse rape. Like, boys are playing Halo and they're like, oh no, I got raped. Like, no, you didn't. You lost a video game.
Right.
Yeah.
But it made me think of Calicane and one of the characters in Calicane when the husband gave her the Calicane and the language that she used to describe that experience was very much the language of describing a rape.
Yes.
Because if someone is planting new traits and personality in your mind, like you're being invaded and forced to do something you don't want to do.
Non-consensual, intimate invasion.
Exactly.
They're penetrating your psyche.
Yeah. So I did not think that was a casual analogy, and it did not bother me at all.
Yeah. Same.
Well, that's interesting in the context of going into feminist fave, misogynist movement, boob talk, because you will never find most any of that in any Sanderson.
Which is nice.
Everything he writes is, well, it is, except for everything he writes is, and I credit this idea to a friend of mine online, but he was like, everything he writes is just utterly sexless.
Yeah, I can see that.
None of his books have any even
I'm fine with
inkling, which is refreshing on the one hand, because you don't have to deal with all this crap.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's like a little unrealistic.
It's better not to do it than to do it badly.
Yeah, but like
not a
as
lot
an
of
adult reading a book, sometimes you want a little bit of that tension.
Well, it feels like also a little conservative. If like nothing he's ever written has that, it's a little conservative.
I think he's doing it on purpose for sure. Because I mean, the man's a religious man.
I'd rather not see it than see it
same. Like
done gross.
Science fiction is not where I go to get romance. So
I mean, yeah, it's like Sanderson's, Stormlight Archive versus Game of Thrones.
Yeah, which I'd rather not.
Your two options.
I'd rather not have that. So yeah.
I'm sure there are things that fall in between those two extremes, but
yeah, I mean, sex is hard to do well in a book. Like that's why every year there's those awards, like the worst sex passage, or whatever. It's just like God.
Jublies?
Jublies.
What was Stephen King's?
Jahoobies.
Jahoobies.
Yeah, you won't find any Jahoobies in any Sanderson.
27
seconds.
26. 25.
Stop looking.
24.
The only boob talk, he mentions a lot of tight clothes, like twice.
She has a tight shirt
yeah.
on. She has a tight shirt on.
leggings.
Tight shirt, like mentioned exactly twice. I was like, okay, titties, yeah.
Fantastical food? I don't think she eats anything.
I don't
No.
think so.
Soap stuff? The Emperor wakes from being in a coma
Yeah, that's true.
to become a better emperor.
Yeah.
I've got personality replication and replacement is a classic Days of Our Lives moment. It's basically the same as having a chip in your brain, which everyone knows is my favorite. Oh no,
That's okay. Keep going. Did you like the book?
Yes.
Yes. Star Wars or Lord of the Rings?
No.
I guess I got a slight fantasy feeling from
as
it.
a badgering morality tale, it's both. But also it's neither because there's no bad guy.
Yeah.
Coming up next time,
Neuromancer.
we're going cyberpunk.
Cyberpunk with William Gibson.
Pretty excited.
Bye.
Okay, bye.